Disclaimer: no gods were harmed in the making of this video, I think.
Here we are, floating on a small planet, spinning around a star, drifting through a universe that is mostly silent, cold, and far bigger than anything the human mind was built to understand. For almost all of human history, people didn't know what lightning was, or why the sun rose, or where storms came from, or why people died. And when human beings don't know something, they don't simply accept the void. They fill it. Not because they are stupid, but because silence is terrifying. Because uncertainty feels like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark. So people invented stories. They needed explanations, even if the explanations were wrong. They needed something to hold on to so they wouldn't drown in the chaos around them. That's how religion was born. Not from truth, but from fear, confusion, and the deep human need to feel that someone, somewhere, is in control. Look at a child trying to understand why their parent is angry. They assume they must have done something wrong. Children blame themselves because the unknown hurts more than guilt. Early humans did the same thing. When droughts came, when diseases spread, when floods destroyed their homes, they believed they had angered a powerful being. It wasn't because they were foolish, it was because their brains needed a cause. Chaos without meaning is unbearable. If people thought they could stop their suffering by pleasing the forces behind it, they would try anything: rituals, sacrifices, prayers, offerings, anything that gave them a sense of control over a wild world they didn't understand. Religion became a framework, a system, a way to make the world feel less random and less cruel. If crops failed, it wasn't just bad luck. It meant the gods were angry, and there was something you could do about it. That belief gave people a false sense of power over the unpredictable. Instead of chaos, they created a rule book. Do this, avoid that, follow these rituals, say these words, and maybe the world will make sense again. But once those stories took root, something else happened, something far more powerful. Leaders realized religion could organize people. If you could convince people that your authority came from the gods, they would stop questioning you. Loyalty became sacred. Doubt became dangerous. Obedience wasn't just about respecting a leader anymore, it was about avoiding cosmic punishment. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about power. Religion gave rulers a weapon no army could match. You don't need swords when you can make people believe that disobedience is a sin. Suddenly, temples became political centers. Priests stood beside kings not because they discovered truth, but because they offered control wrapped in divine language. Belief turned into a tool, a system for managing entire populations who had no other reason to follow the same rules. Religions didn't spread because they were true, they spread because they were useful. And not only to rulers, to ordinary people too. Religion gave people a sense of identity. It told them who they were, what was allowed, and who they should fear or avoid. It drew invisible lines dividing the clean from the unclean, the believer from the outsider. And those lines created tribes. Tribes created loyalty, and loyalty made people easier to lead. You don't need complex explanations to see why religion was invented. You just need to watch how it operates. It explains the unexplainable. It justifies authority. It defines morality, and it divides the world into us and them. These aren't accidents. These are features. One of religion's most effective tricks was claiming it had always existed, that it came from the sky, not from human hands. But everything we know has a beginning, and religions are no different. They were created by people, edited by people, reshaped over centuries to fit the needs of each generation. The gods changed names, holidays shifted dates, rituals were modified, stories were rewritten. And yet people still believed these systems were eternal. If religion were truly unchanging, we wouldn't have thousands of them. We wouldn't have gods who obsess over specific foods in one part of the world and completely ignore them elsewhere. We wouldn't have holy wars between groups who all claim to worship peace. The sheer variety of religions proves they are human inventions, shaped by culture rather than truth. If there were one divine truth, we wouldn't be arguing about it for thousands of years. Some religions emerged to explain death. Death is the one thing no human mind can fully accept. It is sudden, final, and deeply unsettling. Religion softened that truth. It offered afterlives, reincarnation, eternal rewards, or punishments. These ideas weren't discovered, they were created to ease the fear of disappearing forever. Other religions focused on shaping behavior. As societies grew larger, people needed shared rules. You couldn't have communities where everyone acted however they pleased, so religion added punishment beyond human reach. You aren't just breaking a rule, you were offending the divine. Even when nobody was watching, someone was believed to be. Religion became a surveillance system long before cameras existed. It also offered meaning in suffering. When bad things happened, people wanted to believe there was a purpose behind the pain, that injustice would be corrected someday, that those who suffered now would be rewarded later. Those beliefs comforted people, but they also kept them quiet. If you think justice will happen after death, you're less likely to fight for it while you're alive, and that made life very easy for those who held power. Throughout history, the most successful religions blended fear and hope in the right amounts. They promised safety, love, and eternal peace, but only if you obeyed. And if you didn't, there was punishment, fire, torment, exile. The price of disbelief was too high to risk. That is not a system built on evidence. It is a system built on control. Some people argue that religion gave us morality, but morality existed long before holy books. Humans survived because they cooperated, shared food, protected one another, and raised children together. Empathy, fairness, and compassion are older than any scripture. They came from evolution, not revelation. In fact, some of the worst moral crimes in history were carried out with religious approval. Slavery, genocide, torture, oppression. None of these were mistakes. They were justified by doctrine. Sacred words were used to defend some of the darkest acts humans ever committed. What religion often does is take basic human decency and stamp a divine label on it, as if kindness only matters when it's commanded. But morality doesn't need myths to breathe. It thrives when people understand each other, not when they fear punishment from above. Religion also shaped gender roles. Many ancient societies were built around male dominance, and religion helped reinforce it. You'll notice how many faiths center men as prophets, leaders, and divine representatives, while women are cast as followers, helpers, or temptations. These structures weren't revealed by any higher power. They were designed by men who wanted to preserve control. Religion didn't just reflect patriarchy, it amplified it. Even today, many religious teachings still limit women's freedoms, their choices, their voices. The justification is always the same. This is how it has always been. But tradition is not morality. It is simply what survived. The same pattern appears with wealth. Religious institutions have collected money for centuries while preaching the virtues of humility and detachment. Massive temples shine with gold. Cathedrals tower over cities. Televangelists fly private jets paid for by people who can barely pay rent. This isn't spirituality. This is business, and it has always been business. Religion has been one of the oldest, most successful industries on Earth. It doesn't need to produce anything, it just needs belief. Many religions borrowed from older ones. Rituals, symbols, holidays, most were adapted from previous traditions to make transitions smoother. New gods took the place of older gods. New stories were built on top of old myths. This patchwork history is almost never acknowledged, but it reveals something important. Religions didn't appear fully formed. They evolved. They were reshaped by politics, cultural shifts, wars, migrations, and power struggles. They were edited, translated, rewritten. Yet people still treat them as fixed, eternal truths. But if something can be edited, then it was never divine to begin with. As centuries passed, religion started to lose ground in areas where science provided real answers. The Earth wasn't the center of the universe. Disease wasn't caused by demons. Lightning wasn't a message from a god. Slowly, religion retreated from explaining the physical world. Instead, it shifted into explaining purpose and meaning, spaces where evidence is harder to test. But even here, its answers rely on faith, not proof. It claims that meaning must come from outside you, from something cosmic and invisible. But meaning doesn't need permission from the heavens. Humans create meaning every day through love, learning, creativity, and connection. Religion didn't invent meaning, it simply claimed ownership of it. Still, religion remained powerful because it attached itself to the most emotional parts of life, Birth, marriage, death, moments when people are vulnerable, hopeful, or afraid. Religion became woven into these milestones, and that made it harder for people to separate themselves from it. Even when they doubted the teachings, they didn't know how to walk away from the rituals. The emotional bonds were stronger than the logical ones. Religions also protected themselves by building fear of outsiders. If your group believed you were the chosen ones, then everyone else had to be wrong or dangerous. And if other groups believed the same about themselves, conflict was inevitable. This is how holy wars began. Not because of truth, but because of incompatible stories. Stories that people were never allowed to question. When belief becomes tied to identity, disagreement becomes threat, and threat becomes violence. Throughout history, religion has been used to justify everything from colonialism to genocide. When you say your God wants land, conquest becomes holy. When you say your enemy is evil, violence becomes righteous. Religion wasn't misused, it was built in a way that allowed this exploitation. Its structure makes it a perfect tool for those who crave power. Scarcity also shaped religious belief. When food was limited or unpredictable, people believed they had to earn divine favor to survive. If your harvest failed, it wasn't nature, it was punishment. This belief punished the poor and rewarded those who could claim spiritual authority. And when things went well, the credit went to the gods, not to human effort or cooperation. This slowed progress because it taught people to look upward for solutions instead of working together. But when science began offering real explanations, real, testable solutions, religion had to adapt again. It stepped back from the physical world and tried to become a guide for moral or spiritual questions instead. But even there, it offered answers without evidence, insisting on trust over understanding. Some say religion is necessary for hope, but hope built on fiction is fragile. Real hope comes from action, from understanding the world well enough to change it, from solving problems instead of praying for them to disappear. Others say religion gives people comfort, and that's true. But comfort alone isn't enough. A story can comfort you, but that doesn't make it true. There is a difference between feeling better and being better. At its core, religion was a story humans told themselves to survive a world they didn't understand. And for a time it served a purpose. But the world changed. We learned more. We built better tools, science, reason, empathy. Tools that unite instead of divide. Tools that work without requiring blind belief or fear of punishment. Religion comes from a time when we didn't know better, but now we do. We don't need myths to be moral. We don't need rituals to feel connected. We don't need fear to behave well. What we need is honesty, courage, and the willingness to ask difficult questions, even when the answers make us uncomfortable. Once a belief system becomes part of your identity, it becomes nearly invisible. You stop noticing its structure. You stop recognizing that it was built. You start treating it the same way you treat gravity or sunlight, something that just exists. That's what makes religion so effective. It's not introduced as an idea, it's introduced as a truth that sits beneath everything else. People grow up surrounded by it, in their holidays, in their greetings, in their family routines, in the stories they hear as children, in the rules they follow without ever asking why. It becomes the background of their world. Most people don't question the background, they only notice what stands out. But when you finally stop and examine it, you realize how much effort has gone into making these beliefs feel unquestionable. Questioning a political system is seen as curiosity. Questioning a company is seen as consumer awareness. Questioning a scientific theory is seen as critical thinking. But questioning a religion, suddenly you're dangerous, arrogant, disrespectful, even evil. That reaction itself is the evidence of how deeply these ideas are embedded. They were designed to be beyond criticism. That's why religions claim divine origin. You can disagree with a king, but you can't disagree with a god. You can argue with a law, but you can't argue with something that calls itself eternal, all-powerful, and absolute. That isn't an accident. It's a strategy. When humans create something and want it to have ultimate authority, they remove human fingerprints from it. They say it descended from the sky. They say it was revealed, not written. But when you open sacred text, the fingerprints are still there. You see contradictions, edits, political concerns, cultural biases, outdated assumptions, and the worries of the era in which they were written. You see human beings trying to understand their world with the limited knowledge they had. Look closely at religious laws, and you'll see how perfectly they match the environment and political struggles of the people who enforce them. In desert regions, ancient dietary restrictions often lined up with what was safest to eat. In societies dominated by men, the commandments always favored male authority. In times of war, scriptures encouraged obedience, sacrifice, loyalty, and the demonization of outsiders. None of this looks like universal truth. It looks like survival strategy dressed up as divine revelation. Even the idea of one single God, a concept many people assume is natural, was once a radical invention. For most of human history, people believed in many gods, each responsible for different parts of life. But as societies grew and empires expanded, a single supreme god became more efficient. One king, one empire, one god. Simpler, easier to enforce, easier to control. Monotheism didn't rise because it was more truthful, it rose because it was more practical for those in power. Religion also offered comfort in a world filled with injustice. When life is unfair and you feel powerless, it's soothing to believe that someone, somewhere, keeps score, that the cruel will be punished and the suffering will be rewarded, that the pain has purpose, that the struggle means something. This belief brings hope, but it also brings passivity. If justice is guaranteed after death, why fight for it now? Why resist? Why demand change? In that way, religion doesn't just explain inequality, it stabilizes it. It tells people to be patient instead of rebellious, to endure instead of resist, to wait instead of act. From the perspective of those who hold power, this is incredibly convenient. Even today, in many parts of the world, religion is used to keep people in their place. Children are taught that asking questions is dangerous. Women are told that obedience is sacred. LGBTQ people are told that they are sinful or broken. These teachings don't come from evidence. They come from books written in times when slavery was normal, when the earth was believed to be flat, when diseases were thought to be curses, and when human rights were unimaginable. Yet these books are still used to shape modern lives. When people question these outdated rules, defenders of religion often fall back on tradition. They say, this is how it has always been. But age doesn't make something moral. Longevity doesn't make something true. Many harmful practices lasted thousands of years. Slavery, misogyny, child marriage, public executions. Being old only means something survived, not that it is right. Religious institutions also learned to build their power by attaching themselves to emotional milestones, birth rituals, coming-of-age ceremonies, weddings, funerals. These moments are full of vulnerability, love, fear, and meaning. Religion made itself the default guide for all of them. So even if people doubted the theology, they still participated in the ceremonies. It wasn't about belief anymore, it was about tradition, community, and emotional memory. This made religion harder to leave, not intellectually, but emotionally. Another reason religion persisted is because it promised protection. Not just protection from suffering or misfortune, but protection from other religions. If your group believed it had the one true path, then other groups automatically became threats. And when both sides think they're chosen, conflict becomes inevitable. Holy wars didn't happen because people were searching for truth. They happened because people were defending incompatible stories, stories that they were taught from birth and were told never to question. Throughout history, the most destructive acts committed in the name of religion didn't happen because religion was misunderstood. They happened because religion was used exactly the way it was designed, as a tool for control, identity, loyalty, and emotional leverage. When a leader can say, God wants this, any action becomes justified. Conquest becomes sacred. Violence becomes righteous. Obedience becomes salvation. Scarcity also played a major role in shaping religious belief. When people feared famine or drought, they believed divine favor determined survival. If your crops failed, it wasn't the weather, it was a moral failure. This belief punished the poor and rewarded anyone who claimed spiritual authority. It taught people to look upward for solutions instead of looking at themselves or their communities. Progress slowed because every problem became a lesson instead of something to be solved. But eventually, science started offering explanations that worked. Real explanations, testable explanations. And slowly, religion began to retreat. It moved away from weather, disease, and natural events. It stepped out of the physical world entirely, but instead of admitting defeat, it claimed ownership over meaning and morality. But even here, religion depends on assumptions, not evidence. It insists that meaning must come from above, that morality must be commanded, that purpose must be given. But humans create meaning every day. Humans build purpose. Humans decide what matters. Religion didn't invent this ability. It simply tried to take credit for it.
Some people say religion is necessary for hope, but hope built on illusions is unstable. It breaks the moment reality contradicts the story. Real hope doesn't come from imagining a rescue. It comes from understanding the world well enough to change it, from building systems that lift people up instead of keeping them afraid, from solving problems instead of praying them away. Hope is not something that needs to be handed down from the sky. It is something humans create through action, compassion, and knowledge. Others say religion gives people comfort. That's true, it does. But comfort alone isn't enough to justify something. Stories can comfort you, nostalgia can comfort you, denial can comfort you. Comfort is not the same thing as truth. And comfort that relies on shutting your eyes can prevent you from seeing what needs to change. There is a difference between feeling better and being better. Religion often provides the former, not the latter. At its core, religion was a story humans told themselves to survive a world they didn't understand. And for a long time, those stories worked. They gave people explanations when no explanations existed. They gave rulers tools when no governments existed. They gave communities structure when society was chaotic. But the world changed. We learned more. We built better tools: science, medicine, psychology, philosophy, empathy. Tools that don't require fear or blind obedience. Tools that help people cooperate across cultures rather than divide into tribes. Tools that allow us to discover truth instead of invent it. Religion comes from a time when we didn't know better, but now we do. We have history, evidence, and the ability to analyze the past without superstition. We can look at the world with clear eyes. We don't need myths to be moral or rituals to feel connected. We don't need the fear of punishment to behave well. What we need is honesty, the courage to ask difficult questions, the strength to hear uncomfortable answers, and the willingness to build meaning without pretending it was handed down by something beyond us. Religions were created because humans didn't understand the universe or their place in it. And then they were preserved through fear, tradition, and power. They shaped societies, but they also held them back. They offered answers, but they discouraged questions. They brought comfort, but they demanded obedience. They united some people while dividing others. They gave hope, but often at the cost of truth. But being human doesn't mean we need to stay trapped inside those old stories. Meaning doesn't have to come from myth. It can come from relationships, from creativity, from discovery, from compassion, from struggle, from curiosity. None of these require belief in the supernatural. They only require awareness and the willingness to look at life as it actually is. You can find purpose in the things you build, not just the things you're told. You can find connection in the people you love, not just the groups you belong to. You can find morality in empathy, not commandments. You can find strength in truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. When we let go of inherited beliefs, we don't lose meaning, we create it. We take responsibility for our choices, our values, our paths. We stop outsourcing moral reasoning to ancient texts written by people who knew less about the world than a modern child does today. We stop pretending that answers must come from above. And we begin to realize that the mind is not a container waiting to be filled with tradition. It is a tool built to question, explore, and expand. Religion still holds power today, not because of truth, but because of habit, identity, and fear of the unknown. It persists because people are taught it before they can question anything, because families tie identity to belief, because communities equate belonging with conformity, because institutions have centuries of practice protecting themselves from criticism. But none of this makes the ideas true, it only makes them old. And tradition alone is a weak foundation for guiding a modern world. We live in a time where we have the ability to examine the roots of belief. We can trace how religions formed, how they changed, how they were edited, and how they were used. We can see clearly that they were built by humans, not handed down from the sky. They were shaped by fear, by scarcity, by politics, by power, by imagination. And knowing this doesn't diminish humanity, it reveals our creativity. It shows how deeply we wanted answers, even when we lacked the tools to find them. The question now isn't why religion was created. The answer to that is simple: we didn't know better. The real question is why it still holds so much power today in a world where we finally do know better. Why do we cling to old stories when new knowledge is available? Why do we protect ancient ideas instead of updating them? Why do we fear letting go of beliefs that no longer fit the world we live in? Maybe it's because letting go feels like stepping into the unknown again. But the unknown today isn't the same as the unknown from thousands of years ago. We have tools, we have science, we have evidence, we have philosophy, we have each other. We are no longer wandering in the dark, terrified of storms and shadows. We can navigate the world with reason and compassion instead of superstition and fear. The future doesn't require us to erase religion. It requires us to outgrow the parts of it that limit us, to keep the humanity while letting go of the mythology, to keep the community while letting go of the fear, to keep the meaning while letting go of the illusion. We can build something better, not based on obedience, but on understanding, not based on ancient authority, but on shared human experience, not based on divine command, but on human courage. Thank you for listening. Tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to hear. Stay curious, keep thinking, and take care.